Tell me what's the most important thing you know about storytelling?
You have to find a key into the heart of the audience, which means you have to find universals of human experience and then express them in exotic new ways.
James Cameron has, over a 25-year period, directed the first, third and fourth highest-grossing movies of all time back-to-back. The adjusted for inflation ranking is quite different, with the estimations for Gone with the Wind placing in the top spot, but we don't need to talk about that. And Avatar and Titanic are still right there beneath it. The 3-hour romance disaster period piece Titanic, which cast a huge net over a broad demographic, was on such another level from its contemporaries, becoming the first movie to ever cross 1 billion globally and then gradually crossing 2 billion through re-releases, that Cameron may have stolen the king of blockbusters crown from Spielberg.
I'm the king of the world!
In the 12 years between Titanic and Avatar, he doubled down on all of the tricks he'd learned from all of his previous movies that help make that kind of impact. The impact of an event movie so ambitious it causes industry skepticism and causes its skeptics to think twice about betting against Cameron again. Not that there have been many chances to bet against him, because he took a further 13 years to come out with a second Avatar. He'd had the idea for Avatar for quite a long time, before working on Titanic, and the mashup of concepts it's based on had been around for even longer, but it wasn't until Peter Jackson and his company Weta Digital's work with Gollum and King Kong that Cameron felt the necessary tools existed to do Avatar justice. Otherwise, it might have ended up looking like this.
Sky people.
The motion-captured performances of Andy Serkis used to great effect in those two hugely expensive productions, and the general leaps in what CGI was capable of, such as Davy Jones in the second Pirates of the Caribbean, created the opportunity for Cameron to do what he usually does: push a new piece of technology to its limits for a hitherto unseen filmmaking spectacle. In Avatar's case, spending large portions of the film with multiple believable CGI characters inhabiting a believable CGI world that you just have to see in 3D because it's unlike anything you've ever experienced.
I think 3D might even become the way movies are made in the same way that we now make all our movies in color, but there was a transitional period of 20 or so years where some were still in black and white and some were still in color, and you know they were sort of considered on a case-by-case basis. Then color television came along and wham, every movie had to be in color or you couldn't play it on TV afterwards. You see what I mean? Yeah. It was just boom, that's it. There are no more black and white films.
In Avatar's 3-hour-long extended edition, we are first introduced to the film's protagonist, Jake Sully, in a cyberpunk city on Earth, before he's recruited and put into cryo-sleep for the 6-year journey towards the alien moon the story actually takes place on. Other than being wheelchair-bound, Jake spends the whole film looking and acting like the kind of generic action man you might imagine appearing on the front cover of a Call of Duty game, whilst the actor, Sam Worthington, tries not to sound Australian.
Oh yeah, who's bad? That's right. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, bitch.
We're lucky enough to occasionally hear his expository narration from the vlogs he records going through the Avatar program, which allows humans to pilot a body better equipped to survive Pandora, a body almost imperceptibly copied from the indigenous humanoids he quickly finds himself living with and spying on for the RDA, the Resources Development Administration that wants to harvest a mineral with a name everyone makes fun of because it couldn't sound any more like a placeholding parody.
This is why we're here. Unobtainium.
That it's a real word doesn't change that, and in a way, that name kind of encapsulates the whole formulaic but universally recognizable and easily understandable storytelling philosophy that Cameron employs to help give the film the widest possible appeal. Even if you've only read or watched a small amount of other people commenting on Avatar, you've probably heard a few repetitions of comparisons like Dances with Wolves in space, or Pocahontas with blue cat aliens, or if they're feeling particularly memey, Fern Gully Smurfs. For the record, if the Na'vi remind me of any other humanoids from the wide world of creative media, it's the Night Elves from the Warcraft universe. And their similarities don't stop at being tall and blue. They also live in a giant tree and commune with their mysterious god to harness the power of nature. These stories, like Avatar, Dances with Wolves, and many others, are just famous examples of the going native trope, about a character finding themselves immersed in a different culture and possibly in some way turning against the one they came from. Ultimately, these tales stemming from colonial guilt are all inspired by or straight up based on real-world history anyway, and if anything, the sci-fi setting of Avatar makes it a more imaginative and visually engaging use of the trope than something as grounded in reality as the historical fiction of Dances with Wolves. Avatar's disadvantage is that it was released much later. When the trope had gone through more iterations, its saturation had sapped it of any sense of originality, and the internet had been invented to give audiences easier access to media criticism. Avatar isn't uniquely guilty of the trope, it was just late to the party, and the attitudes around it had changed.
And, so I threw everything I had at getting it, at making it a great piece of entertainment. And that was the 3D and the CG and the creating the world and everything I knew how to do, every trick I knew to get people to come to a theater. And then every trick I knew as a filmmaker to engage them. In terms of the story and the actors and so on, and part of that was telling a story that was simple in an archetypal manner that located them comfortably so they could have an emotional reaction.
Of course, tropes and story templates and character archetypes aren't inherently bad. They can and should be used as the foundation of an idea or a necessary failsafe in the absence of one, and Cameron has acknowledged what he sees to be the benefits of using a tried and true formula to create a classic story, but clearly he hit a limit on how much flashy visuals and an alien setting can obscure just how straightforward his use of the going native formula is, and how one-dimensionally Avatar's characters service themes that are about as globally agreeable as you can get. Leaning as heavily on a familiar formula as he has done here risks the whole thing being predictable and dull, especially in contrast to its spectacle, and as that once groundbreaking spectacle continues to lose its novelty. Simplicity and familiarity may be effective at giving a blockbuster a wild appeal, as Cameron has shown with pretty much everything he's made, but just because he's using archetypes to make something coherent and internally consistent, as Avatar manages to be, doesn't mean that quite a lot of people, myself included, find it uninteresting to watch such a by-the-books story. The story's lifespan appears limited if the spectacle falls shorter and shorter at hypnotizing us, whether just because more time has passed since it was made, because we aren't wowed by blue cat aliens, or because the film works less than half as well on a TV screen or a computer monitor than at the cinema in 3D in the year 2009. What remains underneath is a conventional story told through generic sci-fi ideas, its minimal originality or complexity becoming more visible and lackluster.
Fear, fear of pursuit, fear of death, whatever it is, all these emotions that we might have in our lives, it allows us to have a simulation of it. But you have to get to a place where you're actually feeling something for it to work, and that's what the cinema can do for you.
Jake Sully replaces his dead twin brother as the pilot of this cajillion-dollar flesh mecha, and on his first mission, protecting a couple of scientists in the forests of Pandora he didn't care to research, he gets bored and walks off on his own, almost gets killed by two different animals, hurls himself off a waterfall, and only survives the night because a Na'vi native shows up and her god convinces her to save him instead of shooting an arrow through the back of his head. He's an obnoxious idiot and a liability to an expensive operation, who should have been chewed out after acting like a revived supervillain the moment he realized he could move his legs again in this new 10 feet tall body. Instead, after surviving because of what borders on divine intervention, he is rewarded with more freedom and responsibility than anyone else.
It's nice to meet you, sir.
He is sent in with a clear but difficult objective: infiltrate the jungle-dwelling Omaticaya clan and maneuver them away from their home tree so the RDA can mine the unobtainium underneath, without resorting to the costly and violent effort of blowing them all up. Upon accidentally infiltrating the clan, possibly because they view his idiocy as a blank slate to manipulate the situation in their favour, but mostly because the godly presence Awa seems to like him, he spends several months essentially reveling in his new Na'vi body, vlogging about his experiences, falling in love with their way of life, and one of their most influential members, who may as well be the princess. He enjoys it so much he neglects his human body, until things go tits up when the RDA uses his vlogs to justify launching an assault, because he admitted there was nothing the clan would be willing to trade for their tree. His incompetence, or rather his accidental unbelievable competence that Awa seems to use to its advantage for preserving Pandora nature, makes the white saviour trope slightly more palatable. He's not a saviour because he's exceptional or because he's manipulating the natives for personal gain. He's a saviour because Awa is manipulating all life on Pandora, and because he stumbled into the position of being Awa's champion whilst chasing the freedom of a better body and a more thrilling life, and ended up genuinely preferring the Na'vi way of life and sympathising with their situation. However, it's not like the Earth life he would go back to, even with his legs fixed, seems like a remotely good alternative, so it was kind of an easy decision, and it does still take his leadership to unite enough Na'vi to stand a fighting chance against the RDA. In that way, with nobody really questioning the omniscience or supposed benevolence of Awa, besides Sigourney Weaver trying to make scientific sense of it, the white saviour trope remains secure.
You're ready.
Jake's turn happens faster than anyone who hasn't seen the film in a while might remember, in both story time and screen time. At 53 minutes, he's picking his new thong out of his arse crack, and by 80 minutes, he's already reached a high enough level to take on the Acquire a Flying Mount quest, having not long earlier learnt how to handle the ground horse mount. The short time span of his conversion and the montage used to present it risks this feeling like watching someone speedrun the side quests in an open world video game to overlevel the main quest, and dilutes the profundity of his ideological and spiritual awakening, kind of leaving the audience in the dust a little bit in a way that seems to contradict how much importance is placed on the world building. But then these 3 blockbuster hours are inevitably limited compared to the interactive exploration provided by a video game or the often bloated runtime of a multi-season TV show.
I may not be much of a horse guy, but I was born to do this.
Yeah.
These flying mounts that are like a cross between a dragon and a bird called Banshee are easily the most exciting and inventive creature in this first film. To reach them, Jake and his party adventure up the floating mountains, where the rider-to-be must subdue the Banshee of their choosing and form a lifelong bond through their hair tentacle, like with the horses. This and the subsequent flying sequence are considered the highlight of the film, and Cameron had to argue for keeping it in the theatrical cut at all, reminding us all of how clueless studio executives can often be about their own medium, wanting to cut out such a narratively crucial part of his Na'vi journey that also doubles as one of its most engaging spectacles. But the world building and the story remains simple and video game-esque, and this scene, from an outsider viewer perspective, exposes a thematic contradiction the film isn't interested in exploring by, for instance, suggesting that Pandora isn't as harmonious as Awa would like to present it as on the surface. That contradiction is that the Na'vi, for all their spiritual communication with and respect for nature, come to this nest and force a wild animal into submission in order to secure a relationship that kind of disproportionately benefits their hunting and fighting needs. Within the story's internal logic, this tension may be brushed aside, since Awa doesn't express disapproval and the Na'vi treat their pets with more honour than corporate machinery ever could in its cold search for resources, but my eyes and ears still witness the scene of a creature acting threatened before being wrestled and telepathically quelled into obedience.
That's right. You're mine.
After hitting this major milestone, Jake continues on his speedrunning journey by participating in a hunt and learning of what definitely won't turn out to be his destiny, to tame the especially sacred Big Banshee, a feat previously accomplished by a legendary Na'vi who used its provided status to unite the clans. Back at the RDA base, he has to persuade Colonel Quaritch to let him continue his double agent mission, arguing that he's on the brink of convincing the Na'vi to abandon Home Tree because soon he'll be such a trusted and true member of the clan that he can make such a proposition.
If I do it, I'm one of them. And they'll trust me.
Before that, though, Jake's priorities are far less strategic. He wants to keep going in his mission, keep using this expensive Na'vi body to complete his personal journey that he's enjoying so much, culminating in a ceremony and intimately bonding with Neytiri using their weirdly versatile neural appendages. After waking up from his night of romance, Jake immediately starts fighting the RDA, or more specifically, defending the jungle from them and blowing his cover with both sides. The fallout of this situation gives us one of the film's most impressively on-the-nose expositions.
When people are sitting on shit that you want, you'll make them your enemy.
Michelle Rodriguez breaks them out of the RDA base in her sci-fi helicopter, but Sigourney is unlucky enough to get hit because Quaritch is the only human on Pandora not suffering from stormtrooper aim. To be fair, his complete lack of hesitation to storm out of the base without a breathing mask and start shooting is undeniably badass, but no other human or film feels remotely as physically or psychologically threatening, and his psychological antagonism is limited by being presented at all times as such a stereotypical warhawk that he's hard to take seriously.
Pandora will shit you out dead with zero warning.
His cartoonish one-dimensionality, so aggressively embodying humanity's militarism, undercuts the film's conflict, never within this first film evolving from an inevitable but dramatically hollow final boss to a meaningful nemesis for Jake or the Na'vi.
Well, I guess I better go.
After everything has transpired, it seems Jake goes back to vlog about these climactic events, dutifully continuing his exposition after having no real reason to continue filing such reports to anyone besides the audience. To regain the Na'vi's trust, he of course decides to tame the special Banshee, his genius method to achieve this feat for the first time in a generation, to jump on it from above. He then triumphantly rides it down to crash in on the clan's communal, mournful ritual, which from a perspective outside of Awa worship comes across as a disrespectful flex of power, hijacking the opportunity to tame a deeply symbolic animal to make a public declaration of authority, effectively crowning himself the leader of a war he wants everyone else to fight in, and supposedly the only way anyone would have been able to unite enough Na'vi to stand a chance in that fight. Since Jake Sully is, at this brief point in time, the most influential mortal entity on Pandora, he brings Sigourney Weaver in to hopefully get saved from her, by action movie standards, relatively small wound. She dies, and her consciousness gets uploaded into the magic Awa internet, a moment of peaceful, bittersweet transcendence that completely overlooks any messier questions about the Na'vi's medicinal limitations. Perhaps she would have been saved by human medicine or surgery if it were available to Jake and the gang at this time, but isn't being absorbed by a mysteriously spiritual neural network such a nice alternative. From there, the film is as straightforward and blockbustery as can be. The clans unite, Awa summons the jungle wildlife to help give the final push in defeating the RDA, Jake and Neytiri defeat the final boss fight of Quaritch, Jake permanently switches bodies, the end. Freed from any lingering obligation he might have had to Earth and humanity, he can now fully commit to his and the audience's escapism. Nature isn't indifferent, it's benevolent, empathetic, and morally aligned with the planet's most intelligent species. The ecosystem self-corrects to maintain its paradise, the animal's ancestors live on somewhere under the surface, injuries can supposedly be healed through ritual if they're not too severe, and even death feels like just another step in life. God is real, and it will help you defend your homeland, perhaps because by doing so it is also protecting and prolonging its own authority. Pandora doesn't merely contrast Earth. As far as Earth is represented by the RDA, it stands as a divine, environmentally harmonious mountain up which humans must ascend from their corrupt, exploitative pit of corporate money. Any hardship that might complicate this escapism, such as a lack of medicine to treat disease and disability, or the potentially violent tension between clans, is either absent from this first film or quietly resolved by the guiding hand of the world itself. A world world narratively engineered to win an argument against the oppressive greed of corporate Earth, a story declaring itself correct rather than making a convincing argument that it might be, as though it is dragging an enormous warped mirror in front of the audience that distorts their reflection to only see humanity's worst features.
This is your first feature film since Titanic, one of the biggest successes of all time.
No, the biggest.
The biggest.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but it made about $500 million more than the next closest one.
But what was your goal? Was it just the technology or the innovations in technology, or was it to create just this monolith?
We're here to tell a great crackling story and have a lot of people go see it. Just like pretty much any movie, I think people want it. I mean, that's the goal. The question is, how do you get there? How do you create something that captures the imagination of a global audience that's not based on something everybody's already seen? And it's not Star Wars, not Harry Potter, it's not James Bond. To command a global audience these days on something that's not a franchise is a very, very difficult problem. This is my solution to that problem.
Do you think you've succeeded?
I'll tell you on December 19th.
The blockbuster spectacle that propelled Avatar to such unrivaled success wasn't just Cameron's previous track record, including his reputation for well-staged action scenes, it was the world of Pandora itself, and the fantasy of escaping the simultaneously dull and overstimulating human life to live there. A world so amazing and immersive, it made reality seem inadequate in comparison. Besides the cutting-edge CGI used to create the world, this escapism worked so effectively for mainstream audiences because, like the going native plot and its archetypal characters, the world of Pandora is recognizable. It's a lush rainforest that glows at night with bioluminescent foliage, populated by an intelligent species whose freckled blue skin also glows. They climb colossal trees and floating mountains, and use neural hair tendrils to literally plug into nature, riding and seeing creatures that are only marginally more alien than our own animals. Mostly, it's Earth stuff mixed together enough to just about register as alien, but never so strange as to risk alienating audiences who might otherwise recoil from the fantasy or sci-fi genres. We don't actually spend that much time in this first film exploring that much of Pandora. The film gestures towards, or rather points right at, a vast, intricately connected world, but what we see on screen is relatively narrow. A jungle, a few notable creatures, a spiritual presence, and a handful of set pieces distinct enough to make for memorable scene locations. Even with the sequels broadening the map with new biomes, creatures, and cultures, they're not broadening it that much, and the design philosophy remains recognizable, and how that world is utilized in the first film, and frankly also the second film, feels less like an invitation to explore and more like elaborate window dressing. Beautifully colored and lit, impressively assembled and shot, yet ultimately fronting a shop I don't feel compelled to wander into. The result isn't an unconvincing world, but an uninteresting one. Competent, perhaps cohesive, but curiously hollow.
Because I think of myself as a very average audience member. My film...
I don't believe that.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's, in terms of taste, it's very middle of the road. My film school was not USC. It was not a film aesthetics course. It was the drive-in movie theaters of Orange County.
This universal recognizability also applies to the cultural identities of the Na'vi clans, openly blending and lightly remixing a range of real-world indigenous traditions. However, unlike how the familiarity of Pandoran wildlife often undercuts its alien quality, the cultural borrowing of the Na'vi serves a more important narrative purpose of complementing the transparency of the film's themes and allegory. At the same time, the Na'vi themselves have been designed to sit in a marketable middle ground between being alien enough to avoid the uncanny valley, tall, blue and feline, yet human enough to remain conventionally attractive. Their proportions aren't that far removed from idealized human physiques, especially when there are no humans on screen to compare their height to, and their faces resemble supermodels. An athletic vessel perfect for surviving this wilderness that viewers might plausibly want to inhabit, or at least they wouldn't mind doing so if it was necessary.
Netiri.
Neytiri.
Netiri.
Saldana's performance as Neytiri really is the heart of the movie, her fusion with the technology so adeptly demonstrating how emotionally articulate a digital character can be that it almost feels as though the entire design of the Na'vi and the concept of the movie were sculpted around her and what she could deliver.
I think Zoe was the first person cast. I cast her right away after I met her and auditioned with her and worked with her a little bit. I knew she could learn the Na'vi way of physically being, which we hadn't even worked out yet, but we worked it out with her and with some movement specialists.
Saldana gives Neytiri a believably indigenous charisma that starkly contrasts Jake's video game protagonist awkwardness. He already didn't have much going for him as a paraplegic Marine getting into fights in dystopian bars, but Neytiri really removed any doubt he might have had about whose side he would take. As the Na'vi Jake falls in love with and spends by far the most time with, she ends up disproportionately representing everything the film wants to say or suggest about the Na'vi. By contrast, the human side is defined almost entirely by the conflicts between greedy corporations, militarized brutality, and powerless scientists. The spectacle of Pandora's CGI-fueled escapism works as well as it does because it is unburdened by the compromises and contradictions that define real societies, but that same purity is what makes the world feel smaller, even superficial in retrospect. This is one of the areas where the sequels are, if only a little bit, beginning to expand where the first film lacks. The Way of Water introduces cultural friction not just between humans and Na'vi, but among Na'vi themselves. The ocean-dwelling Metkayina clan's suspicion of Jake's family, their differing traditions and physical traits, and their discomfort with outsiders suggest that Na'vi society isn't universally welcoming or culturally and morally uniform. Likewise, Fire and Ash appears from the trailer to be complicating Pandora further by introducing a more aggressive, antagonistic Na'vi faction, though whether this becomes genuinely nuanced or is simply another binary extension of Awa versus humanity remains to be seen. I'm writing this video as that sequel is about to be released, and it will have already been released when this video gets published, so I guess we'll already know. Hopefully, Fire and Ash and the later films, however long they take to release, if they get made at all, continue down this path of allowing Na'vi culture to be nuanced and occasionally wrong. But it's a shame those possibilities weren't explored from the beginning, and that the first film will, for the foreseeable future, seem like it avoided interesting storytelling in order to facilitate the unchallenging universality of its manufactured escapism, which, when paired with its spectacle, resulted in the highest grossing movie of all time. When not adjusted for inflation.